Live from the visual radio studios of Performer TV in Quincy, Massachusetts, it's Weed Talk Live with Curt Dalton from Cannabis.net and Jimmy Young from ProCannabisMedia.com.
We're here in our home state of Massachusetts. Did you ever think we'd be talking about cannabis as a legal commodity?
And they're even finding tombs now in Egypt and in like Mongolia that have cannabis laid next to the sarcophagus.
So they're not getting buried with their bongs?
Yeah, no, there are no bongs back there, just the plant. I guess,
Oh, my goodness. Where's my teleprompter? I'm lost without my teleprompter. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Weed Talk Live. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt Dalton with Cannabis.net, and this is the Cannabis News.
Oh, boy. Here we go. That's right. We need that. But actually, let's just talk about what's coming up over the next 2 hours because we've got a great show for you. In fact, one of the legends in the cannabis industry is on hold with us right now. Steve D'Angelo from California will be getting to the father of the cannabis industry and hear his story in just about a minute. But I want to tell you a little bit about this show because this is really the first time we have debuted a new show through Pro Cannabis Media, Weed Talk Live with Curt and Jimmy. And who knows where we're going to grow with this, but we're going to grow it. That's for sure. So Steve D'Angelo is going to join us. I'm going to tell you a little bit later on that David Rabinovitz is going to join us. He's one of the premier financial consultants in the cannabis industry. We will also have the one and only Dan McCarthy, former editor of Sensi Boston Magazine, in studio. Dan will be joining us in an hour or so at the top of the hour. And now he's involved with a group called the Cannapreneur Group. But we are going to first start a little bit about Steve D'Angelo. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Curt, I tell you what, I'm going to put you right on the spot, Curt. Yes. You tell me about Steve D'Angelo because you've already interviewed him once.
I did for Cannabis.net a little while ago. I've known Steve for a couple years, and we're right now out of Boston. And for people on the East Coast that don't understand who Steve D'Angelo is, he is a true pioneer of the cannabis movement all the way back into the 70s on the West Coast when HIV and AIDS patients needed cannabis in San Francisco. He has literally been in prison for the plant. He has challenged the U.S. government and won to the Supreme Court. There's a lot of accomplishments. He is now has a publicly traded company. Harborside is, for those that don't know on the East Coast, probably the biggest and one of the nicest dispensaries in the Oakland, San Fran area. Literally a trailblazer, traveling 300 days a year, speaking, and a tremendously nice human being.
And we're looking forward to talking with him. His project now is the Last Prisoner Project. You can find out about that at lastprisonerproject.org. But basically, he's trying to get everybody who's been jailed for cannabis offenses out of jail, which I think is pretty amazing. And you know what? The guy's, he's a year younger than me. He's 61, I believe, or maybe 60. He's born in 1958. My math is bad. June, I believe, was his birthday. He took his company public the day after his birthday this year, which I found interesting. He has been called by Fortune magazine, one of the most powerful people in the cannabis industry. He now has a new show on Green Flower Media called Ask Steve. And if you're not familiar with Green Flower Media, please check them out because I happen to think that website has the finest quality video, the best online educational course. I'm a big fan of Max Simon and what he's done at Green Flower. Have you ever met Max, Curt?
Very briefly at one of the MJ BizCon shows.
And we are still efforting to get Steve on the line, or do we have him? We have him. I can hear it, right? Steve D'Angelo, I'm Jimmy Young. Welcome to Boston.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Hello, Boston.
Hi, Jimmy. How are you? Curt from Cannabis.net.
You actually,
Steve, sorry.
That's right. You actually, Steve, were interviewed by Curt Dalton a few years back. His site is Cannabis.net, and this is the first time that you and I are talking, and indeed it is a thrill, to be honest with you, because those who are in this business have a ton of respect for you and the hard work that you've done. I do want you to start right off and talk a little bit about your Last Prisoner project and why it's so important and why you've taken this up as a cause right now.
Sure. Well, it's important because there are still tens of thousands of people who are in prison. We've reformed laws in the majority of the states in the United States. We have a legal industry that's creating intergenerational wealth for some people. But meanwhile, 40,000 plus people in the United States remain incarcerated for cannabis offenses for something that never should have been a crime in the first place. So I'm calling on the cannabis industry and the cannabis community to put together a legal defense organization to go to all of the states and eventually all the countries around the world where people are still locked up and get them out.
That's a tremendous goal, Steve. But if there's one person on this earth who can probably pull this off, it's you, just because of all the work that you've done. One of the neat stories that I found out about you as I was doing some background checks, you were born in Philadelphia, am I right?
Correct.
And in the early 70s, and you and I, by the way, are just about a year apart in age. I'm 1 year older than you. Okay, I was born in 57. In the 70s, you were actually instrumental in trying to get cannabis legalized in Washington, D.C. Am I right? Were you not fighting for that cause then?
Yeah, I mean, I began my cannabis career as a cannabis activist in 1974. I put on my first smoke-in Washington, D.C., and throughout the 1970s, we were able to make a significant amount of progress until Ronald Reagan was elected, and he pushed all of that progress backwards.
And Curt, you got a question? I know you do.
So, Steve, we're on the East Coast. I was wondering if you talk a little bit about, tell the listeners and the viewers about Harborside, and then also going public. What was it like for the process of taking a cannabis company that touches the flower, as well as your name recognition, and getting it public? Could you give us kind of the version of what it was like for you?
Yeah, well, the trajectory of Harborside is very, very interesting. We were one of the first 6 cannabis businesses that was licensed in the United States. That happened in 2006 when the city of Oakland became the first jurisdiction anywhere to issue commercial cannabis licenses. And our mission in the beginning was to create a gold standard for cannabis retailing, to prove that when done with intention and intelligence, that cannabis retailing could bring benefits to communities rather than harms. And so over the course of 12 to 15 years, we succeeded in doing that. We wanted to make sure that Oakland was not the last jurisdiction to license dispensaries. And so we were pretty successful in that task. It wasn't easy. The federal government tried very, very hard to close us down along the way. We engaged in multiple bouts of litigation with them. And finally, just in 2016, they gave up a civil forfeiture case that they were prosecuting against us. And that enabled us to start moving towards the public offering. So less than 3 years after the most powerful government on the planet stopped trying to close us down, we were able to go public on the Canadian Securities Exchange. So it was a tremendous trajectory and a great accomplishment.
Absolutely. And, now that you are publicly traded, Steve, and enlighten me a little bit more about a public company, you have to report to your stockholders all of your doings and all this. Exactly how is your company structured? And I believe when you went public, you did a reverse offering or something like that?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, in the United States, we are not able to access our own public exchanges like the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, and so the only place we could get publicly listed was the Canadian Securities Exchange, and the Canadian Securities Exchange only lists Canadian companies. So what we did was merged with a much smaller Canadian company who was already listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange, and that enabled us to then list there and meet all of their requirements. But it is a crazy situation because right now Canadian companies who do exactly the same thing that our company does, who have footprints in Canada, growing and selling cannabis, are allowed to list on the stock exchange and the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ. But American companies, or companies who have activities in America, like ours, are still unable to list on the U.S. public exchanges.
There's a lot of movement in Washington, D.C. right now about, and a lot of talk about safe banking. You were one of the founders of the NCIA, the National Cannabis Industry Association. They've done, in fact, that's where you and I actually met in passing at Lobby Days in May down in D.C. And I wonder, talk a little bit about what you know is going on in D.C. You know, that Safe Banking Act has moved away from the House now and is in committees in the Senate. And are we ever going to see public banking or having access to the banking industry for the cannabis group?
Well, I strongly support all of the efforts that are being made with the Safe Banking Act, but I'm far from convinced that the passage of the Safe Banking Act would really solve the problem. And the reason for that is that bankers are extremely conservative creatures. As long as cannabis is a Schedule I substance under the Controlled Substances Act, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to persuade the majority of bankers to do business with cannabis businesses. This is a problem that could be solved with one phone call from President Trump to the DEA administrator, instructing the administrator to reschedule, or better yet, deschedule cannabis. I think that as long as we have the Schedule I designation for cannabis, financial services are going to remain challenging for us to access.
I remember reading a little bit about it. It actually could be that decision to remove it from the Controlled Substances Act at a Schedule I. I've actually heard it could actually just be an administrative decision. That's what you're telling us, right?
Yes. There's this popular misconception that the only way to reschedule or deschedule cannabis is by an act of Congress, but that's wrong. The Controlled Substances Act explicitly authorizes the administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration to reclassify any substance when new scientific information comes in. And, of course, there's been an abundance of new scientific information that has come in. So the DEA administrator is an employee of the president. He works for the executive branch. It would take one phone call from the president to the administrator for cannabis to be completely removed from the Controlled Substances Act. And in fact, that is what should happen. I'll tell you another piece of little known history. In 1970, when the Controlled Substances Act was being debated by Congress, the decision was made to put cannabis into the Schedule I designation temporarily, because even in 1970, people were pushing back on the crazy idea that cannabis should be a Schedule I. So what happened is Congress temporarily put cannabis into Schedule I, pending the impaneling and a report by a presidential Blue Ribbon Commission. That Blue Ribbon Commission was headed by a guy named Raymond Schaefer, who was the former governor of Pennsylvania, a Republican, a former prosecutor, a center-right guy. But he put together a genuine, real, science-based report on cannabis, and that report came back with what every other science-based report comes back with cannabis, that it doesn't cause criminality or insanity or anything else bad. And the Schaefer Commission recommended that cannabis be removed from Schedule I. They said it doesn't belong in Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. The Schaefer Commission said that cannabis should be removed from the Controlled Substances Schedule entirely, and the nonprofit transfer of cannabis between adults should be decriminalized. So cannabis was never intended to stay in Schedule I permanently, but unfortunately, President Nixon never allowed that report to go back to Congress, and the issue was never reopened. So it's long past overdue for that to happen.
You know, you and I are both, we grew up in the 60s and the early 70s, and it was quite a tumultuous time in our nation's history. One of my earliest memories, of course, is when Kennedy got assassinated, and then the next memory was the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, but that's another story. And, of course, we also lived through Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King. And, we had a lot of division in our country in the 60s and 70s, and a lot of people like yourself, and I walked in protest of the Vietnam War as well. And now here we are 30, 40 years later, and I'm not quite sure we've actually made as much progress in race relations and even in relations between people that are different than we have now. And in the 60s and 70s, weren't we all about make love, not war? Whatever happened to that?
Well, I think that there is a whole new generation of young people that is embracing those same ideals. When I look around and I see things like Occupy Wall Street or Black Lives Matters, I see the echoes of the values that we had. When I see things like, the ongoing struggle for gay liberation, for trans rights, I see our values in action. So I actually think the world has changed quite a lot. We're not anywhere near where we need to be, but these days I'm lucky enough to spend my time traveling around the world, and everywhere I go, I meet up with young people who grew up with keyboards in their hands and in one hand and a joint in the other hand. I call them the smartest generation, right?
I love that.
And the thing is, no matter what country they come from, they're imbued with a common set of values, right? They are tolerant of people that are different from them. They work towards racial justice. They respect the environment. They're trying to eat and conduct their lives in a way that's more in balance with nature. They try to be kinder and gentle with one another and with the other creatures we share this planet with. I see that there is a worldwide global tribe of people who have been awoke by this plant. So much as I look around and I despair at where politics is at the continuing militarism, at the way that nature continues to be abused, I'm also just really inspired and full of hope by this new generation that's coming up who's so completely embracing and living out these ideals.
Steve, I had a question for you. During an interview I did with you a year or two ago, I asked you if you had to go to a deserted island for the rest of your life. You could only take 2 strains with you, and you nailed it right in the interview. You said which strains you would take for the rest of your life. Do you remember your answer?
Yeah, it would probably be a Granddaddy Purple and a Neville's Haze.
That's right. You got it right. So this time I decided with a new question. We had
go ahead.
We had an article come out on Cannabis.net about a week ago as who's on your Mount Rushmore of weed. And you had been nominated by some of our readers as you got to put Steve D'Angelo on there. So I'm going to put you on the spot in the same way and say who is on your Mount Rushmore of cannabis, as if you could put 3 or 4 people up there.
Well, Jack Harrer and Dennis Perone would definitely need to be up there, and we don't want to just have men on Mount Rushmore, for Christ's sake. So we would need to put Brownie Mary up there too, along with us. I'd say that that would be a good start.
Not Bob Marley, not Tommy Chong, not the people that perhaps those that aren't as tied into the industry as you are in California. I mean, those are the names that come up when we talk about Mount Rushmore.
Well, here's the thing: when the worldwide renaissance of cannabis that we are seeing today was not a given. It did not come easily. It was the result of decades of really, really difficult struggle, persistent struggle in the face of overwhelming odds by people like Dennis Perone and Jack Harrer. Dennis Perone got arrested 14 or 15 times in the course of getting cannabis into the hands of AIDS patients. In one of those raids, he was shot by police. As soon as he got out of the hospital, he started doing exactly the same thing. Jack Harrer crisscrossed this country from one side to the other. He went all around the globe telling people the truth about cannabis. And he kept on doing that until he was taken down by a stroke on stage in the middle of a speech. So if I'm going to put heroes up on our Mount Cannabis, I'm going to put the heroes up there who were really the people who fought and struggled, who were in the trenches. God bless Bob Marley. I love his music. He's inspired millions of people. I certainly believe that he belongs in the in the Hall of Music, Hall of Fame of music, and he deserves to be honored as an incredible artist and a prophetic artist. But if we're talking about the cannabis struggle and the people who are most responsible for the cannabis renaissance that we're seeing today, yeah, I think it's people like Jack and Brownie Mary. You know, Brownie Mary's story is incredible. Brownie Mary was 71 years old. And this is the middle of the AIDS crisis in San Francisco. There's funerals happening all over the place. And she's a volunteer at San Francisco General on the AIDS ward. So Dennis Perone collects weed from underground cannabis growers, gives it to Mary. Mary cooks it into brownies, and she takes it into SF General. And she gets busted for doing that, not once, not twice. She gets busted 3 times in a row. And there's this amazing video clip of her. She had just gotten released from jail, and she gets up on stage and she says something like, "God damn it, I would do it all over again." You know, so I feel like those people deserve to be honored.
All right,
that's great.
Your Mount Rushmore is better.
That's much better. That's right. That's right. So much for that Mount Rushmore idea, Curt.
Forget Tommy Chong. Sorry.
That's right. That's all right. I get it. You know, in Massachusetts, we're kind of new to the adult use recreational world. We haven't even had this out there for about a year. They are selling over $1 million of adult use recreational weed in Massachusetts every day now through the 22 dispensaries. They had a hearing today in Massachusetts by the Cannabis Control Commission. They're trying to put body cams on delivery services in Massachusetts for cannabis. What's your reaction to that?
Sounds like a solution in search of a problem. At least in California, and certainly in our shops where we've conducted tens of thousands of deliveries over the course of almost 15 years. We haven't had, I think, a single report of an adverse customer interaction with a delivery person. So it doesn't sound like there's a problem there that needs to be addressed. On the other hand, every single regulation, every single requirement, every single piece of new equipment has a cost associated with it, an expense associated with it. And one of the real challenges that we're seeing across the country, I'm sure it's a factor in Massachusetts too, is that the cost of doing business in the legal cannabis market is higher, considerably higher than the cost of doing business in the unregulated market. And those costs ultimately need to be passed on to the consumers. And so if you're not careful about regulatory requirements and really, you know, requiring more than is necessary, you end up in a situation where the price of cannabis in the legal market is much, much higher than the price of cannabis in the unregulated market. And that's when you start seeing outflow, people leaving the legal market and going to the unregulated market. So there's a real danger in overregulation, and this to me sounds like an example of it.
And not to mention, I think, an invasion of personal liberties and civil liberties. And, you know, there's enough. We're always on camera, for crying out loud. And of course, we're on camera right now. But again, even if you walk down the street, you're on a camera somewhere in security. You know, there's a security camera somewhere focusing on it. And I just feel like we're always under the microscope. And adding another camera into this transaction just makes absolute no sense to me. I agree with you 100% about the cost of doing business inside the market and how it is actually feeding the illegal market. I got to ask you a little bit, some insight about Humboldt County in California. What's going on there right now? Tell us a little bit about that, Steve, because I understand there's been some raids there. They're trying to get some people in Humboldt County on the regulated side. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in Humboldt County.
Well, you know, what's going on in California in general, and it's happening in Humboldt County in a noticeable way, is that the regulatory requirements of the state of California have been so demanding, right? I mean, cannabis in California is basically regulated more strictly than radioactive waste is. And those requirements have made it close to impossible for a majority of the legacy cannabis growers, people who are growing cannabis for years and years in California, to come into the legal marketplace. It takes a minimum of hundreds of thousands of dollars for somebody to get a license, and we're talking about small growers who went up into the hills, not because they wanted to get rich, but because they wanted to live a lifestyle that was closer to nature and raise their children in a community that was more in alignment with their own values. And those folks are having a very difficult time now because there are large corporations who can hire armies of attorneys and very sophisticated compliance departments and raise money on public exchanges in order to get licensed. But the smaller legacy growers don't have those assets. So what's happening is because of that largely the sales in the regulated marketplace are not as high as was anticipated. The state is not seeing the kind of tax revenue that they wanted, and so what they're trying to do is use the same tactics that have been used during Prohibition to try and drive people out of the cannabis market. And I think it's the wrong way to do it. Instead of having raids, what they should do is they should lower the licensing requirements to something that is reasonable. Welcome these folks into the legal system. Legalization was supposed to bring an end to raids. It was supposed to bring an end to people going to prison for cannabis, not more of it. And so there's a simple answer. The answer is that you use market forces and sensible regulation. Right now in California, there's a tax rate that in many places equals 40%, right?
Wow.
That's also driving consumers to the underground market. So lower those taxes. Make the licensing requirements reasonable. Maybe have a fund to give loans to small farmers so that they're able to meet the licensing requirements. That's a much better strategy than trying to send in helicopters and paramilitaries and all the stuff that's been tried for 50 or 60 years and already failed.
Yeah.
Steve, you touched on an interesting point. Where is it today for Harborside? If I wanted to buy a pound of Granddaddy Purple, your finest, what does it cost me at Harborside? And I'm sure you know this answer is, the next answer is, what can I get that same pound for on the gray or black market today in California?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the general rule of thumb is you are paying somewhere close to twice as much in the legal market as you are in the unregulated market once everything is added in. Sometimes it may be a little bit more or a little bit less, depending on what kind of deals that you can find. But there is a large price disparity, and it's really a problem because what we found is the people who are being driven to the unregulated market are people who most need the protections of the legal market, right? Folks who are on disability, senior citizens, other people who are on limited incomes, families who have severely ill children so that the parents can't work. Those are the folks that are being pushed back to the illicit market, where the cannabis that they're getting is untested. Nobody really knows what's in it, where the selection that they have is much more narrow. It's much more difficult for them to understand what their dosage is or what cannabinoids they are getting. So it's really a problem. I think that it will work itself out over time, but it's an unfortunate situation right now.
And I'm hoping that somehow, some way, it will get better, Steve. If you had to look into your crystal ball finally, where are we going to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Any idea?
It depends on where you're talking about. I think that in the state of California, over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, that you're going to see more movement into the legal part of the market. I think you're going to see the illicit market shrinking. I think that overall in the United States, that within a 2 to 3 year period, I think we're going to see significant reform at the federal level, quite possibly a descheduling of cannabis entirely. On the global level, we are already seeing the movement that we started in California in the early 1990s sweeping the entire globe now. Major European countries like Germany not only have medical cannabis, but they're distributing medical cannabis through their National Health Service. So the government is paying for people's cannabis. Why? Because it's such an effective medicine. The same thing now is beginning to happen in Asia, which traditionally has been one of the most resistant places to cannabis reform. So Thailand and South Korea both now are in the process of enacting medical cannabis legislation, a huge breakthrough. And I just came back from spending almost a month in Colombia, and Colombia now has a legal cannabis industry, and the rest of Latin America is already racing to catch up with them. So this is going to continue all around the world. Cannabis is just too valuable for people, for nations to ignore. Ultimately, I don't know whether it takes 10 years, 20 years, but we will see the day that cannabis by dollar value is the most valuable product on the planet.
Fantastic. Steve DeAngelo, the father of the cannabis industry. I'll tell you, one of the things I love about talking to people in the industry is learning the history of it and talking to people like yourself that have this kind of knowledge and history of it. And I really appreciate you taking the time out to join us for the last few minutes, 30 minutes or so. And I look forward to one day sitting down with you and, perhaps sharing a little something out there. You know what I'm saying, Steve?
Yeah. Well, let's see. We'll see if some of that granddaddy or Neville's face is around, huh?
Oh, wait a minute, Steve. I know you're going to be down at CanX in Jamaica. I'll be there. Why don't we invite Jimmy down? Jimmy can make it to Jamaica, I bet.
I love Jamaica. You kidding me? I've been there many times. Steve DeAngelo, you can find out more about him online. Just Google him. He's all over the internet. He's got his own show on Greenflower, and of course, remember his latest project is the Last Prisoner Project, and you can find out about that at lastprisonerproject.org. Steve DeAngelo, thank you so much for joining us on We Talk Live with Curt and Jimmy, and we're going to actually take a little bit of a break now and come back with our financial consultant and expert, David Rabinovich. So don't go away. We've got some interesting facts for you and some interesting videos just to keep this going, as it were. We'll be back after this. We are pro-cannabis media. Why? Because we're a media company that is pro-cannabis. Pro-cannabis, because those stories are not being told. We are live streaming from events. We are pro-cannabis media. Why? Because we're a media company that is pro-cannabis. Pro-cannabis, because those stories are not being told. We are live streaming from events. Hi, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the live stream from the New England Cannabis Convention. We are blogging on all topics. We are partners with Leafly, Weed Maps, Greenflower, MJ Headline News, Sensi Magazine, and The Weed Tube. We are Weekly News Dabs with Jimmy Young. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of News Dabs with Jimmy Young, now reporting for the Pro Cannabis Media Group and ProCannabisMedia.com.
From New Orleans, Liz Dameron, Pro Cannabis Media Network.
We are listing cannabis-friendly events. We are interviewing cannabis experts on the podcast In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. You were one of the co-authors of Question 4, which paved the way. First of all, how did you get picked for that honor, if you will?
We write laws, regulations, we advocate for them, and then we get licenses and we keep them compliant.
We are The Cannamom Show with Joyce Gerber.
A different way of understanding how cannabis impacts your body, which is very different from alcohol, which I think that's the big message that has to get out.
And also much less harmful.
Yeah, much less harmful.
We are a digital media company for the cannabis industry, telling their stories in their words.
There's nothing like having patients come back and say, I feel better.
I am confident that Congress is, at the very least in this current Congress, by next year, going to make it legal for, make it clearly legal for banks to take marijuana accounts, which is a big step forward.
I also teach cannabis law at my alma mater, Suffolk Law.
Oh, what?
She's just getting started.
You know what I'm saying? My goodness, this is crazy. So then combining my background with chemistry and in microbiology, I really wanted to bring that data-informed science into my cannabis practice, and I started working actually at a few dispensaries in Massachusetts.
It's a whole new world of weed out there. I never thought I'd see the Red Sox win a World Series, let alone 3.
Yeah.
Okay? I never thought I'd see the Patriots win a Super Bowl,
neither.
let alone 5. This is tape. Okay. We are ProCannabisMedia.com. Subscribe today.
You like to stay active, but when pain gets in the way, reach for CBD Medic. All-natural, topical pain relief with the benefits of THC-free hemp oil. Just apply at the source for fast relief of pain. CBD Medic, available at CVS.
All right, we're rocking. We're rocking here at We Talk Live. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the program. I am the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, Jimmy Young.
And this is Curt with Cannabis.net.
And we're also joined now by
David Rabinovitz.
David Rabinovitz. David, thank you so much for coming on. Someone I have the utmost respect for in so many ways. As a financial consultant in the cannabis space, first of all, I need to get your reaction to whatever you heard from Steve D'Angelo, because I found what he had to say just so compelling and great history lessons.
So it's off to me. I really didn't hear too much of that when I was in the waiting room.
Oh, man, that's why I asked you in the break. Did you hear it?
I heard some of it.
Okay, all right, fair enough. What, were you impressed with the 20 seconds you actually heard?
It was very good.
Okay, good. Good job, David. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you are involved in the cannabis space and who you might even be working with, or if you can tell us.
Sure. So I do a lot of things, Jimmy. I'm working with a group to get a couple of licenses for retail stores, advising some economic empowerment applicants. I'm working with a team that was selected by the Cannabis Control Commission as one of the 6 trainers for the social equity and economic empowerment training.
Cool. And that's just part of your time, I know.
Right.
One of the things that Steve brought up, we've talked about this, Curt, both privately and publicly on some of the programs that we've shared, is the regulations are becoming so stringent and so tough. It's difficult for the industry to even get started. You're a guy who looks at numbers and margins. Is this what's going on? Is this what's feeding the illegal market?
It is the way the industry is structured right now. The licensing process is very difficult. We were looking at real estate today. In order to get a document from the owner of the property to apply to the community, to get a host community agreement, $25,000 up front.
Up front?
Up front.
And is that refundable by any chance? Or is that truly just like, here, take my money just to process this?
Take my money, and if the deal falls apart, we forfeit anything we've put down.
Wow.
Is that money going to the host town or to...
Going to the landlord. That's one of the problems with the situation right now. The landlords, in many instances, are controlling the flow. The towns don't pick who gets the host community agreement. The landlords pick who gets the host community agreement. Because if a town has, as an example, 2, 3, 4 slots, and there's 20 or 30 people competing for it, and the landlords have multiple people coming in looking for that location, the landlords auction it off to the highest bidder, and it's who the landlord selects that gets to go to the town, which is typically the people with the deepest pockets.
So just a question here. I've been talking to a lot of people in this space and a lot of different avenues. One in particular, there's a company out there that's trying to buy up the empty warehouse spaces and the empty factories that have shut down all around Massachusetts and obviously in New England too, and then lease that back out to the cannabis community. So is that not help? Would that not help the industry?
Oh, I think it could help. I think it could help the smaller players because now you're going to take a lot of the capital out of the equation, right? Somebody's going to come in and say, I'll lease you a turnkey facility. That's a great thing. The issue is some of those lease rates can be kind of high. I mean, I've talked to a couple of people who are on the lessor side of that, and I've heard comments that they expect to have their money back within 3 years.
Whoa. So that's pretty quick, right?
That's huge,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Can you imagine buying a house and leasing it to somebody and paying off your mortgage?
In 3 years.
In 3 years?
That would be unbelievable,
right?
Actually.
And we got, 23 stores open right now, and there's 199 in total in the pipeline. So behind those 23 are another 160-something applications, provisional licenses, final licenses. There's only been, I think, one retail store turned down to date.
Interesting. What about the pace of the licenses? Are you frustrated by that as someone who's trying to get this thing going?
I haven't gone into the queue, but I'm dealing with people who have gone into the queue who are saying that it's taking many, many months. It is not the 90 days that I understand was expected in the law. And I think some of it is that the commission just is trying to get staffed up. I heard from an attorney last week that they understand the commission just hired 5 more people to begin to review applications. But I spoke to somebody who had an application that went in February, and they still haven't heard back from it.
Wow. And of course, then there's the other side, those who have been impacted the most by the war on drugs, the failed war on drugs, people in the city, those of color. And what, again, where are they? They get lost in the shuffle again, don't they?
No, I didn't get lost. They're out there.
Yeah.
They're out there and they know where they are. I think a lot of them are very frustrated. It comes back to, I speak to a lot of those people. I run a meetup group that's got over 200 members, people who want to start cannabis businesses, and a lot of people are minorities in that group. And I've been to a couple of mass can events, demystifying cannabis, and I've met with a lot of economic empowerment people, offered my number to see how I can help them out in some way. I hear time and time again they cannot get host community agreements because they can't compete with people who have more money. And then when you begin to talk to people on the investment side, it's a common refrain. I'd love to talk to you about investing in your business. Come back to me when you have a license or a host community agreement. So now, in order to get the host community agreement, you need a lot of cash to give to the landlord to go through that process. We're working with a town right now. We've been in it for 5 months, and I believe the team is going to pick up the final approval before September. But that's 5 months, and had they had to pay for the space up front, they'd be out of pocket 5 months worth of rent. That's a lot of money just to play around to see if you can get the local approval.
Curt.
But how hard would it be to, obviously the landlords are sitting at the bottleneck, to get the flow changed? Because now it's, I think people who are our listeners and viewers might think, oh, I go to the town, I apply, I either get yes or a no or provisional, and now let me go find a place. But it's not, that's how it should go. But obviously it's, no, you need your place first, and this is where the landlords control. Now come back to the town. How hard is it to change that part of it, to say, no, towns do this first, now go look for a place?
I'll tell you in a few weeks on that,
Okay.
how hard it is.
Come on back.
But I will share this, right?
Okay.
All the towns believe that you need to have the space before you come to the town to apply. I think a lot of that is, first, I think it's backwards for the way this system works. It was the right way in 2013. In 2013, the state held sessions, the Department of Public Health, told the cannabis prospective operators, here's what you need to do. It was many, many months. People were running around, finding locations, getting the local letter from the municipality of non-opposition, and the application window was 1 day. And if I recall, it was about 6 hours or 6.5 hours. You had to have your application in between like 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., and it had to be stamped, and if it came in a minute late, you were out. And then they let everybody know the answers all at once. It wasn't on a rolling basis as it is today. So in the original medical program, there was one window to apply, and if you think back to the old college days when they would post the grades outside the professor's door and you'd go up and find your student number and look up the grade, that was the same way. In January of, I think it was 2014, they announced who were the winners and the losers. Well, That makes sense when you've got one window in a limited amount of time and you're going to have one time that you announce the winners. This is a rolling process. In a rolling process, it really doesn't make sense to say, go get your real estate first, go through months of meetings. Right? I was in a hearing about a week ago, and the one of the attorneys made the comment, this is only a couple of minute ordeal that we need to go through. And I pointed out it's not a couple of minutes, because if it doesn't happen in one meeting, it's 3 weeks until the next meeting. Right. Start adding 3 weeks and 2 weeks and 4 weeks, and pretty soon you're into it for 5 or 6 months.
They've certainly controlled the rollout of this industry, haven't they?
It's been very controlled, but what I have to say in the Cannabis Control Commission's defense is nobody knew how to do this. They were the first ones east of the Mississippi.
Right.
They did the best.
And they're trying to do it right.
And they followed what had been done, which was the medical program. And now I think they're trying to make some corrections. I got through probably 150 pages of the new regulations before the 5 o'clock deadline today to submit commentary. And they made there's a lot of good improvements in there.
One of the things that they talked about at the Cannabis Commission today was the body cams for delivery services that they hope to roll out. A lot of controversy, a lot of, I believe, a lot of passionate appeals were done. What's your feeling about body cams for delivery of adult use recreational cannabis?
I could go back and forth. I could argue both sides of it. I do think it's not a bad thing that when the delivery agent gets to the front door, that they have an iPad and they say to the person, I need to swipe your ID to prove you're over 21, take a picture of it, and I need to take a picture of you so that I can tie out that, in fact, I gave this product to somebody who's over 21 years old. And I didn't just leave it on the doorstep. I didn't give it to a 7-year-old who answered the door. And I can prove that the person who ordered it was the person I delivered it to. Right? That part I get. The whole body cam, I think a lot of it's way overblown.
Why? In what way? I mean, I think it's an invasion of personal liberty. I do. I mean, why does there have to be a record? If they're delivering, there's a company out there, I know they're not, the company's Drizzly. They deliver alcohol door to door from liquor stores. Mm-hmm. They're not wearing body cams.
That's a great point, right? Cannabis shouldn't really be treated that much differently than... Well, again, two sides of it. I don't think cannabis should be treated that much differently than alcohol or tobacco. The flip side is cannabis is illegal at the federal level. So I can see the extra safeguards, but a lot of those safeguards should evaporate as soon as cannabis becomes no longer illegal at the federal level. Right? I get that you want to have it tighter to protect the delivery agent, right? Imagine the delivery agent who gets accused of leaving it with a 14-year-old kid.
Oh, boy.
Right?
Well, they shouldn't have a job if they do that, because they
shouldn't, right. But now you got a he said, she said, right? And you could have a delivery agent in a bind. So my view is it's not a bad thing for the delivery agent to be able to confirm the ID and prove that the person who's there,
is the person who ordered it.
Right? Because if you walk into the store, you're going to be on camera.
Right.
Right? And then you're going to have to show your ID, and they're going to verify it. And that protects the store. I think the delivery agent should be protected the same way, even if it's a clause that says it evaporates as soon as the feds take it off Schedule 1.
Interesting.
Well, Steve kind of talked about this, where it's a answer in search of a problem, and for Massachusetts to act like we have no idea what's about to happen. We have, as Steve just mentioned, 50,000, 100,000 deliveries.
Examples in California. Never had a problem.
Why are we pretending now as Massachusetts? God, we have no idea what's going to happen when people start. Well, how about we look at 9 other states that have been doing this for years?
Again, I don't disagree. I can argue it on either side, and I look at it from if I were on the delivery side, because I'm working with somebody a couple people want to get in the delivery business. One on the wholesale side, one on the retail side. So when I start to dig into where are the risks, I think it protects them if they have proof that who they delivered it to is who they were supposed to deliver it to.
You talk about risks, and you talk about profit margins. When you look at the entire business, the entire industry, what sector is the safest to invest in, or can you even say that?
You love to ask me that question.
I do. It's probably the third time I've asked you. Have I ever gotten an answer? I'm waiting for the goddamn answer.
Your most capital-intensive investment will be in cultivation. And I think that you probably have some of the greatest risk in cultivation because it is I am not a grower. I can't grow strawberries, right? But, and I may have told you that last time.
Yes, I remember.
But it takes a lot of money to set up a cultivation operation, right?
Right.
And if something goes wrong with your crop, you're in trouble, right? And you don't. It's not like you've made a bad batch of tomato sauce, you throw that out and you start over again. Something goes wrong with your crop at the wrong time, you could lose 8, 10, 12 weeks worth of time, right? There's a lot of investment in there. I think that's a riskier business for a number of reasons. And I don't think it's as easy to grow a warehouse full of marijuana as it is to grow 6 plants in your basement. Right? It's a different business.
Absolutely. And of course, the smell of the plants in your basement is going to be the biggest thing that you have to control because it's a very pungent plant, is it not, guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
We've all heard that. Can I ask you about Mayor Walsh for a second? And Curt, let's talk about it. I mean, we're definitely being provincial here a little bit. We're from Boston. I'm amazed at how many different hoops he's making everybody in his backyard go through just to open up the first dispensary, which I believe they awarded to Pure Oasis coming in the fall.
I don't. They're the first
in the city of Boston. I mean, that is Brookline.
Wait, I thought Andrea Cabral had the first one.
That's the medical side.
Okay. I'm not sure on that.
You're not sure? I'm pretty sure.
I know Pure Oasis is the first economic empowerment.
Yes,
right?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, and also but for adult use recreational.
Okay.
Yes, that's where I was going with that. And that's
okay.
So again, it took them over 2 years, and still it's not open yet. And you go past Netta in Brookline, and the lines are still around the block. It's amazing to me.
It's a great thing for Soterra, great thing for Netta.
Yeah, they did make a good deal there. Let's talk about that for a second, shall we? How the big conglomerates that are supposed to be limited to 3 dispensaries in the state, that isn't exactly being held to, or at least it. There's some gray area with the management of that, too.
Oh, I don't know if it's a gray area. I think that there are people who have hidden out in the shadows. But I think that's going to come to light real fast, right? The Cannabis Control Commission put out a bid, and they had a number of people apply to become an investigator for that on a contract basis to uncover in the application process that issue. And I believe next week they're going to contact the first round to say whether or not those folks made the first cut.
Interesting. That, again, another fascinating aspect of what's going on in the beginnings of this industry. There's so much out there. David, if you were to pick a business, I'm going to go to it again, that you wanted to put some money into, are you still saying, are you going to look at the cultivation side, or is that too risky?
No, for me, it's too risky.
Yep.
I think it requires a lot of specialized knowledge. I met with 2 young people today who had a product in Rhode Island for medical folks that apparently went over well. They're from Massachusetts, and they want to start a manufacturing operation in Massachusetts. If I were sitting with a pile of cash, here's my view. The most valuable license is a retail license because it's the most scarce, and it is the funnel way to the customer. But if I were putting my money in and betting, I would bet on the manufacturers because they're going to have the greatest potential for growth. A retailer is going to only sell within their area. Let's assume there's 199 stores as of August 8th. Not open, but open, final license, provisional license, application submitted.
Yep.
And there's probably going to be another 100 that are going to come out. We're past the major activity of the host community agreements. I had a Google search term that would tell me what was going on with articles about host community agreements. Earlier this year, from February to May, I couldn't keep up with reading the articles. And then sometime in May, it began to drop off. So I think most of the people got their host community agreements. There was a big jump in the number of applications for retail stores over the past couple of weeks. And I think I'm sticking with my original number of like 300 to 325 stores. You divide up the market, the stores will only get to be so big. Some will do better, some might not. But the manufacturers who get a really good niche product, I think they could do very well.
Interesting.
So it kind of ties into Jimmy's question. I'm going to rephrase it. And I've written a few articles on Cannabis.net about margin compression and how I think when this 2 to 3 years out, we're going to see the price of this flower come down, down, down. As Steve mentioned, everyone's growing rooftops. You can even grow at home, like you said, in your basement. You have big grows. So there's margin compression on the flower price. Are you a pick and shovel fan? Are you, competing on the plastics and the packaging? Or as Jimmy said, what to you when you look 2 or 3 years out, if it isn't going to be a big manufacturing facility, where do you like it? Where do you see margins holding up?
Retail and manufacturing.
Okay.
I think the biggest compression is going to come out in the people who are going to suffer the most margin compression will be the cultivators.
All right. Now I'm going to bring up Cambridge. City of Cambridge is now at war with the 3 medical dispensaries that are inside the city, and the city councilors are getting just they're under attack by the various attorneys that represent the medical dispensaries who want to move forward with their recreational license, and the city councilors are trying to hold out to allow the economic empowerment people to get first crack at the adult use rec licenses. But it will take those people another 2 years, which means the people of Cambridge will have to wait another 2 years before they have adult use recreational opportunity. And yet they have 3, I think, fine facilities doing a great job on the medical side. And that includes my friends from Revolutionary Clinics. So I guess my question is on that, how's this going to end up? Is it going to go to the courts? There's already a threat of a lawsuit. Who knows if they're going to break each other's legs? I don't know what's going to happen in Cambridge.
I don't think they'll end up in court.
Okay.
Right? Think about the wheels of justice grind exceedingly fine, but they move exceedingly slow.
Okay.
If they sue, they may win, but it's going to take a long time.
Either way, the city of Cambridge residents who voted it in are not going to get access to it, which to me says that the city councilors are putting their own ideals and ideas ahead of what the population wants. And that just drives me, local politics drives me nuts. All politics drives me nuts.
I think the city councilors are trying to do a good thing. I think they're trying to level, Somerville and Cambridge are trying to level the playing field for the economic empowerment applicants. I don't know if they're going about it the right way. I communicated with a couple of the city councilors from Cambridge. In fact, I made the suggestion to them, if you want to get the economic empowerment applicants going, allow them to come in and approve the teams without forcing them to get a location. And the ones I spoke to didn't think that they could do that. They needed to go check to find out. So marijuana is one part of what the city councilors throughout the or boards of selectmen are dealing with throughout the Commonwealth. You're in marijuana every day. I'm in marijuana every day. We understand it. We live it. We breathe it. We read a lot about it.
We smoke it.
Right.
We dab it.
Yeah. City council, the elected officials, they don't know as much, so they're having a harder time navigating to figure out solutions. Personally, my understanding is the Cambridge medical operators have offered to kick some money into a pool over
$5 million fund, exactly.
Right. Why Cambridge could solve this in a heartbeat.
Yes, I think so too.
Very easy. Bring in all the economic empowerment teams, screen them, pick the teams you want. Send the teams out to find the real estate, and then say to the medical operators, here's the deal. We're going to go one economic empowerment and one medical. And if you on the medical side want to get your store converted, help these people get going.
Yeah. And
right?
Again, and Steve Hoffman actually said that to me when I talked to him. He really wants to see the private sector step up and create economic empowerment programs. And there's a perfect example of how it can be done.
Yeah.
Well, you got their ear. Pick up the phone and call them again, David.
I don't have anybody's ear but yours, Jim.
That's what you do. And by the way, I do appreciate you coming in on such short notice. As always, everybody I talk to is smarter than me when it comes to cannabis. That's for sure. And certainly with business. And David Rabinowitz, how can people get in touch with you to perhaps pick your brain or even pay you, for instance, to get some of your consulting?
They can find me on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Right? That's an easy one. Just search David Rabinowitz with a V.
With a V.
Right? And cannaventurelabs.com.
Yep.
or my Gmail address, drabinovitz@gmail.com.
Let's give it out there. All right, David Rabinovitz, thank you so much for coming in tonight. Appreciate it. We got some great reaction to some newsworthy items that happened here in Boston. I hate to date these things, but you know what? It's going to keep going. This is not going to stop in the next day or two. This is going to be going on and on for weeks, if not months. So, David, again, thank you so much for coming in. We've got Dan McCarthy is coming in. I know that he's out there and ready to go. We've got another great phone interview with a gentleman by the name of Seth Ginsburg. You want to stick around for that after the top of the hour. But now I'm going to introduce you to the group that Dan McCarthy is now working for, now that he's not working for Sensi Magazine anymore. They're the Cannapreneur Group out of Westboro, and they held this great event locally here in Quincy just last week. Check it out.
Personally want to thank everybody for showing up to this event. The caliber of the people that are in the room, the kind of companies, entities, investors, motivated people that are within the cannabis industry.
That's Dan McCarthy, the former editor of Sensi Boston Magazine, now serving as the Director of Communications for the Cannapreneur Group out of Westboro, Massachusetts. Two former wealth managers, Mike Scott and Mike Collette, formed Cannapreneur to build a fund for early-stage companies in the cannabis space. The famous Alba restaurant in Quincy was the site of a networking event for many of the movers and shakers in the cannabis industry in the Boston area.
So yeah, we're very happy with the turnout. Absolutely.
There's a sense of excitement in the cannabis industry.
Oh yeah. So my history is in the wealth management space, and yes, I had fun in the wealth management industry, but I got to tell you, the cannabis is like 10 times more fun. It really is.
The Cannapreneur Group isn't just raising money for profits. They want to impact the world with their investments. You could call it socially responsible capitalism, doing right by doing good. Basic purpose of the Cannapreneur Fund is to...
So what our goal is to scour the world for the top 1% cannabis entrepreneurs to provide them strategy, leadership, and capital to help elevate their business.
It's a real medicine. It's really helping people. It's changing lives. And I've seen it firsthand with my own family members, the impact cannabis can make.
All right, welcome back to another Weed Talk Live section here on our live stream on our YouTube channel. And again, please subscribe, like, share, and all that neat stuff on social media. I welcome in actually, are you now an old friend, Dan McCarthy? I'm not sure how to describe it, but we do go back almost over a year now. So I guess you're an old friend.
I feel like it's an old friend thing.
All right, and you are working with the Cannapreneur Partners.
Yes.
Tell us about the Cannapreneur Partners, Mr. Director of Communications now. Okay, go ahead. Because you've already corrected me on my spelling.
Well,
and
no.
It's all right. It's all
I
right.
wanted to just, make sure the name was right.
Right.
You understand branding more than anything else.
Oh, yeah.
Cannapreneur Partners. Cannapreneur Partners is a, cannabis investment and entrepreneurial engine that is sourcing, for the 1% outliers in cannabis entrepreneur businesses that are where a lot of other businesses are right now, which is looking for private capital. Like one of those, people right now that are trying to get into cannabis in different ways from an investment standpoint. A lot of people think about I'll just play the stocks. And there's a different ways to do that. There's the Canadian market and so on and so forth. But there's not a lot out there. So the people that are really trying to be those early dollars in, those people that are really trying to help get entrepreneurs off the ground, because the biggest thing that's needed essentially after a great idea is flushed out and a wonderful pitch deck and all the pro forma and all the projected everything, when that's done, they still need not only capital, they need a lot of capital, right? And this goes from everybody from the micro businesses right on all the way up to, big pharma and things that are trying to take off. And, with trying to focus on finding those kinds of entrepreneurs and pairing them with the right investors, right? Because what is worse, there's actually nothing worse in the long-term planning of some kind of a business getting off the ground than having the wrong investor with the wrong entrepreneur. Like some people might be like, I'm money in, I'm dumb money, I just want money in, just tell me when it comes out. Others are, I want to come in and help place operational excellence and leadership and strategy. And do you not know how to make a pitch deck? Well, hey, we'll help you do that. Like, you've got a great idea, you just need your rough around the edges, because this is a black market that's coming into the light. And while there are some people that have a lot of different skill sets that overlap perfectly, some that are coming from legacy industries and now coming into the marijuana industry because they're seeing if you need plumbing, if you need water, filtration systems, it didn't matter if you were making it for something else before, it's still needed in cannabis. The idea that there is enough room in this industry for the right entrepreneurs to get paired up with this needed capital, that's kind of where Cannapreneur Partners and other firms like it, but specifically Cannapreneur Partners and its $150 million fundraise currently open to investors is doing.
So you just had a big event the other night here in Massachusetts. Investors, people looking for funds. Give me what was the excitement? What was the buzz as far as the ideas or the products that people are seeing in Massachusetts that they're getting excited about?
Well, in terms of the event we had last Wednesday at Alba,
right across the street.
Literally across the street from the studio.
The rooftop is open after the show, by the way.
That's right, yeah. Gotta go. The event, that particular... Now, so Cannapreneur Partners throws these sort of networking mixers like every 6 to 8 weeks, right? And they're doing... we're doing a variety of different ones. That particular one last Wednesday was really kind of about... discussing like exactly what Cannapreneur Partners is, what it's doing, why it's raising the money, where it's going to go, how that works within small SPV, special purpose vehicle type entrepreneurial engines, all the way up to sort of like topco stuff of like if people are trying to get into something that can actually put this capital into these companies and then be those sort of early dollars in and then early dollars out when all of this explosive growth is happening. And not only that, we are still in the time before federal prohibition ends. And what do we know more than anything else? That once federal prohibition ends, right, the big things come in. Blackstone comes in, Big Pharma comes in, and big's going to gobble small, and not so big is going to gobble very small. And if we don't make certain measures now, in the legislature, in the law writing, all of these open comment periods that are happening where you have like great micro businesses that are coming up and really talking about the struggles that these small guys are having that need this capital, that need the delays to stop. I was listening to a fantastic speech from Ed D'Souza today from the open comments section, and it was wonderful. But I guess we got a phone interview. Sorry,
that's right.
I go a long way sometimes,
which is great. And by the way, you have plenty of time.
Okay.
But we do have someone on hold. We've lined him up for an interview. I'm excited to talk with him because I am a sufferer of arthritis, and that is how I got my medical marijuana card. Seth Ginsburg is the executive of the Global Healthy Living Foundation, and he just released a study entitled Patients' Perceptions and the Use of Medical Marijuana. He's also the co-founder and president of one of the great named companies of all time, Creaky Joints. Seth Ginsburg, welcome to We Talk Live with Jimmy Young and Curt Dalton, and Dan McCarthy's with us too.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Good. We're having an interesting discussion here, and it continues with you. Tell us a little bit about, first of all, Creaky Joints, because I just love the title of that group.
Sure. So Creaky Joints is an online patient community focused on education, support, advocacy, and research for people and their families suffering from the more than 100 different types of arthritis. Arthritis, as you know, is the leading cause of disability in the United States. And I've actually had arthritis since I was a little boy. I was diagnosed at age 13. And so I grew up as a teenager, kind of coming of age, and I was actually a first-year student up in Massachusetts at Babson College when I was in my dorm room bunk bed, staring at the coils above me, wondering, where is everyone else going through something like this? And this being the 90s at the time, I had gotten out of bed and emailed my former internship boss, and in one sentence said, there's got to be a way to bring people together in a positive environment where we can share strength and experience. And fortunately, he wrote back the next day that he'd like to become a social entrepreneur, and we ought to do this together. And that afternoon, Creaky Joints became a website and remains one to this day, 20 years later, creakyjoints.org, which we then folded into what became the Global Healthy Living Foundation, the official nonprofit umbrella organization with the mission to improve access to care for people with all chronic diseases.
Okay, and this is where I get to show my gross fingers on camera. Okay, this is my osteoarthritis.
This is not a rated R show. There's kids watching.
Sorry. So, Seth, needless to say, it's hereditary. I've had it for a long time. 4 major surgeries in 20 years. Needless to say, that qualified me for a medical marijuana card when the program first started. I take Charlotte's Web CBD oil every morning with my turmeric and orange juice, and when I run out of it, my fingers ache. So I know it works. You just came off a study where you identified 57% of arthritis patients have reported trying CBD and or a combination with THC and without. And there's tons of stuff we can talk about that. Tell us a little bit about this study, though.
Yeah, sure. So we have a patient-powered research network called Arthritis Power. It's a free web and mobile app for people with arthritis and enables them to track how they're doing, track their outcomes, as well as participate in patient-centered studies that we conduct. And one of the more recent studies we conducted was actually derived in part by our patient governors. This is a governing body of the research registry, and they created a study for measuring patients' perceptions and their use and experiences with medical marijuana. And so we surveyed close to 1,100 people, 1,059 actually people, and found, as you mentioned, that 57% of those folks had either tried medical marijuana or CBD products for medical reasons. And of interest as well is that of those who use marijuana regularly, 62% use it every day. So it sounds a lot like what you were just saying. There are lots of caveats, and you know, with a smart audience like yours, it's important to note that this is a study with great limitation. You know, there's something called bias in terms of the cohort, the people that were selected themselves to be a part of this, and this was clearly and simply self-reported and observational and individualized. This is not clinical data. This is not randomized clinical trial data, which is the information gathered from studies that are conducted about, treatments pertaining to, managing chronic diseases, or any for that matter. These clinical trials are not, as you noted earlier, possible right now due to the federal scheduling of marijuana and CBD, and therefore we don't have data from a clinical standpoint as to the effects of these products on things like arthritis and other chronic diseases. And that's the main message. That's kind of the big takeaway from our study, and I'm happy to get into a lot more of the details, but the essence is so many people are medicating with these products. So many people are medicating regularly, and of those finding there to be great relief in their symptoms, and therefore we need a more adult approach, as I like to say, toward research in marijuana and CBD in a randomized clinical trial environment, in one where we have academicians in universities as well as industries that are all working together to research and understand these products and then present it to regulators like the Food and Drug Administration. None of that is occurring right now, as you know.
Yeah.
And so, we're lacking a lot. And this is our main advocacy message, obviously, in terms of, begging for more structured and more evidence-based research about these products so that nobody, yourself included, should be the guinea pig, should be the people with, the anecdotal evidence. You're an N of one, as they say. It's just you saying that's your relief from that product. So let's blow the doors open now and, let medical science and research and academicians as well as industry have at it so we can, really raise the bar and both learn more as well as apply those learnings through the literature with guidance for how to treat these diseases using products like these. But without any data, none of that's going to happen. It's all a proverbial pipe dream for now.
Seth, Curt, Cannabis.net. I'm looking at a picture of you on the big screen, and you're a very handsome man. You look way too young to have arthritis, and you had mentioned you had it as a child and as a kid. How do you feel about youth, younger people, in their teens, if it's for a medical condition using it? Are you a pro, if a 13 or 14-year-old kid has arthritis at this level, I'm for it? Or kind of what's your stance on that, having it so young?
Yeah, so this is where I clearly disclose I'm not a doctor, and so I'm definitely not qualified to give a medical answer to that. However, I do know how to read, and I do spend an awful lot of time researching this subject and similar subjects. It's the nature of what I do, and I can say that my caution, my concern is, children. Are in development. And, there's variance in what folks say between 21 and 25 is the age until which, the brain isn't fully formed, frankly. And drugs like marijuana, again, absent any qualitative and clinical evidence, but with some degree of understanding as to its impact and what it does to folks, to the brain, to the mind, is something that would concern me. I'm a parent, and I obviously will, do my part to prevent my child from, having access to marijuana anytime, at least while she's living in my house. Specifically because she's still in development, specifically because children's minds and brains don't fully form. And again, there are many more qualified experts, neurologists, pediatric neurologists, pediatricians who also feel very strongly. In fact, that's probably one of your bigger dissenting voices or, opposing viewpoints with respect to proliferation and legalization of marijuana. And that's the harm it can cause on the youth and the not fully formed brain. And so, I think we have to take that into serious consideration. And then, of course, we have to carve out the exemptions, and there unfortunately always are terrible cases that children suffer from rare diseases and other very impairing conditions for which there might be relief from marijuana. But absent those exceptions, I would very strongly caution folks with respect to children, teenagers, even young adults with respect to marijuana and CBD.
Now, it's interesting you say that because one of the little factoids that we've been putting up as we go to breaks is actually reporting on a recent study of teenagers, I think thousands of teenagers from the 1980s, and they were separated into regular users, moderate users, occasional users, and never users. And then they were retested in their 30s. And what they concluded in this study was it didn't affect the development of their brain from teen to adult. And again, this was, again, it's not a clinical trial. It's an anecdotal stories, but these types of studies are being done now. And I certainly respect what you're saying as an adult and as a parent. But again, a lot of this stuff, and Dan McCarthy, I know you feel the same way, gets really, I don't want to say blown out of proportion, but it feeds off the stigma a little bit, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, look, one of the biggest things that is going to propel this industry and the onboarding of the new understanding of something that has been categorically prohibited, but presented in orchestrated misinformation for years. I mean, like the stigmata that exists with it, whether you're looking at it in a generational sense or whether you're looking at it in a cultural sense, whether you're looking at it in sort of like, I mean, you can't even look at it in the scientific sense because there is no data. That's what we're always talking about now, right? Because of the restrictions on federal research. The fact that re-education has been something that has probably been one of the most, like the highest spikes in the change, in the real paradigm shift in how cannabis is being perceived. Look at any Gallup poll right now versus 2 years ago. You're seeing insane spikes in the fact that more than usually between 60 and 70% of people in a national Gallup poll on just the general idea of, without qualifiers, saying like, are you for legalization or maintaining prohibition, right? You like, let's say it's like 75, 78%, something, right? Then usually that's why you want to start getting down to those different questions. Some people might say, I am totally for legalization. I'm not for commercialization. Some people might say I'm for legalization, but only for medicinal use. Right. Some people may say I'm for legalization, but you know what? I've noticed everybody's smoking it outside and I smell it all the time. And now I'm ticked off. Like there's all these different factions in this conversation.
Seth, you mentioned marijuana and CBD in the same breath. We all recognize that there's a hemp product that does not have THC in it, or at least up to 0.3% THC. That is out there. The Farm Bill made it legal, and now it's going to be a crop and a commodity and traded and all this neat stuff. But the entourage effect that says you need a little THC to really get the most benefits out of the CBD. Where do you stand as far as that theory goes, those anecdotal stories, and do you recognize the differences, obviously, between the two products there?
Yeah, so while I don't have an official position to share here, I'm conscious of the potential that hemp has for our society with multiple applications as a renewable resource for manufacturing and through the multiple methods with which extraction processes could net helpful particulates. So I'm I think the Farm Bill was a really good step in the right direction. I think that, we have the opportunity to, continue our country's great legacy of farming quality products and adding hemp to that, or adding, I should say, hemp to that list, I think is a net good thing. But I don't think we're even at the tip of the iceberg for the potential and the proliferation and opportunity that it presents to our society.
Absolutely. Seth Ginsburg, I want to tell you thank you very much for coming on and joining us a little bit here. Dan obviously has to get the final word in.
No. I just want to say, Seth, on a personal note, Creaky Joints would make an excellent band name.
Great. Well, you know what? Membership is free. Check it out, creakyjoints.org. You sound like a great member to be. I'd welcome your involvement in our community. No, seriously, Dan,
I love it. No, I love everything you talked about.
And it's all made available for free, and we're thankful to our sponsors for that, of course. But I'm glad to have joined you this evening. Appreciate the important dialogue. Do want to caution parents and their children around marijuana. But I also, at the same time, look forward to much more clinical evidence and literature and guidance from the medical and scientific community. That's what we're on the tip of the spear driving toward, and conversations like this are really important, moving that in that direction.
Well, thank you very much, Seth Ginsburg. Appreciate it, from the Global Healthy Living Foundation and, of course, Creaky Joints. That was Seth. One of the things that the Cannapreneur Partners are involved with is the company. I'm going to never get it wrong. I'm never going to get it wrong now.
Like when you say it like that, I feel like I need to be wearing like white gloves, or something.
You could wear white gloves. I don't have a problem with that.
You should next time.
Maybe
Michael Jackson made a career out of that baby, right?
That was a very timely reference.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's go to wait. I want to go back to something serious here because it does relate to the Cannapreneur Partners.
Sure.
It has to do with Abacus and CBD Medic, a company that kind of was on display at your event last week. And I got to meet Perry Antelman, and we're going to actually have a little story about him. We actually played one of the commercials. Their product is an FDA product that has CBD in it, which is by far the first time I've actually heard the FDA actually approving a product with that wasn't Epidiolex, right?
Right. So, in the fact that, there are companies, one of the things I like about the Abacus story, right, is something that is indicative or a microcosm of hopefully what's coming at a larger scale, which is that, there is this generalized cultural onboarding where we're at a place where companies are getting through those hoops, and they're getting that kind of national distribution. They're getting, they're getting to a point where if a brand like that is able to get distribution, whatever reviews it's had through the FDA and associations, like everybody's constantly looking for that next stage of validation, that next stage of like
legitimacy.
Can I look at a label on this thing and understand the product that I'm about to consume or use or buy or invest in or partner with or anything? And what I liked about that company and one of the things we try to do with the events is really, spotlight companies that are bell cows, right? Are the sort of lodestars that are showing the way that people are getting through the gauntlet to get to a place where I have family members that whatever reservations they may still have, yes or no on CBD, some are like totally on board, some have like seen the light, the first time they use a cream or take a tincture, and all of a sudden they're cutting down on just like over the counter central nervous system drugs, right? Advil, anything else, right?
Yeah, and I still use Tylenol.
Yeah, and that's fine. But the idea,
thanks for your permission, Dan.
No. I mean,
Dan, you're good.
You can slowly get to a more plant-based medicinal routine, but we'll get there. We got you at the Boston Freedom Rally up and running last year, so we'll get into that.
We're not going to be playing that video tonight.
No, somebody's got that queued up.
Yes,
Come on.
No.
Come on, somebody's got that
down the road. I don't even think
that's got to be a B-roll.
I don't even think Curt's ever
Have you not seen that?
I don't think so.
We've got to be able to pull that up.
Jimmy Young losing his dabbing virginity at the Freedom Rally.
Now you have to pull that up.
Well, I know for a fact that Mike does not have that loaded into his machine.
That's fine. Anyway, to circle back, like what I liked about Abacus and what I like about these sort of bell cows in the industry is that it sometimes takes that brand recognition. It takes somebody that is at that final place where like they're just unwilling to try it. It doesn't matter. It's one thing if you've tried it and like it's just not for me. Just like I know plenty of people who take like extra strength, like Advil or something to like go to sleep. Like Advil PM and stuff. I've tried that when I can't sleep, and honestly, I did not like the effects. It was a total negative for me. So of course I didn't do that. The fact that there are brands that are on the rise that are coming into this market that are showing a new market like the East Coast, how robust markets, warts and all on the West Coast and more developed legalized markets have a range of variety of products, a range of variety of access, and a true range of how these people are accessing this product, right? Because as we all know, there is no difference between medical cannabis and regular and adult use cannabis. It's still cannabis. Just like if you right now, I've been a journalist for years, right? Floating around on the freelance circuit, no insurance, that kind of thing. If I twist my ankle, I don't have insurance. I'm not going to go to the hospital, so I'm going to go to CVS and I'm going to grab.
You're going to self-medicate. You're going to take care of it yourself.
And I'll get some kind of ibuprofen or something. If you have insurance and something happens and you go to the hospital and they give you what? The prototypical 800 milligrams of ibuprofen.
Right.
It's ibuprofen and it's ibuprofen. The only thing that's different is how you access that same medicine, right? Cannabis is this that's why early on there was a lot of well, we're going to only develop medical cannabis because it's medical cannabis. It's it's a plant. It's like saying medical tomatoes. They're still tomatoes.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. And I am fascinated by this discussion about self-medication. And actually, I think it was Steve D'Angelo who talked about guinea pigs. Mm-hmm. We're all kind of guinea pigs because these products interact with each individual endocannabinoid system in every human. I love talking to people that are clueless about this. And I say, you have an endocannabinoid system inside you. And
the fact that's not being taught in medical school.
Right.
I mean, that's a whole
but
other
that's
discussion.
Changing. That is changing.
Slowly.
I think I saw Cal
That's
Berkeley.
part of that re-education.
Right.
The fact that Jimmy does it in his creepy bar voice is a little weird too. But hey,
creepy.
Are you saying I'm creepy? Am I creaky or creepy?
Yeah, creepy.
I'm creaky and creepy.
I think we just saw how he goes. And, hey, how you doing?
All right, how you doing? We're gonna take a little break here, and we're going to actually hear from one of the founders of Cannapreneur Partners. Named Mike Scott, and his story about his family. It's actually a very intense story. You'll hear that during our little break, and then when we come back, I'm going to attack these two guys. All right, We'll be back with more after this.
Through coincidence, my brothers and I actually experienced what we would call, we witnessed what we would think of as a miracle. My mother went through a horrible PTSD episode, and if you understand PTSD, it's a very difficult illness where you keep reliving these horrible thoughts in your brain. So we saw her go through one of the worst episodes we'd ever seen. She went catatonic. She basically passed out, fell down, hit the ground, and wasn't breathing for about a minute and a half as we were dialing 911. When she came to, the paramedics were there, but because of paranoia, she declined, going into the ambulance and going to the hospital, and through just kind of sheer, we didn't know what to do, right? So we're at my house, and one of my brothers says to me, we hear all this about medical marijuana. Let's try it, right? So we, give her some cannabis, and without exaggeration, we see her go from an emotional wreck, can't even regulate her breathing. She's crying, to not just baseline, but actually uplifted. And she snapped out of it, and she was like, "Where are my grandkids? I got to give them a hug. I can't believe they saw this." And so it was that minute I knew that, okay, this is not just about making money. There's real lives that we can impact on a very, very positive and compelling level. And so that was, within 3 weeks of me witnessing that, I jumped in this industry 2 feet in.
Like this middle music.
That's good bumping music. I like that bump music. Good job, Mike Zotos, on that. Welcome back to Weed Talk Live. I am the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, Jimmy Young.
I'm Curt with Cannabis.net.
And
I'm Dan McCarthy, Director of Communications, Cannapreneur Partners.
There you go, Cannapreneur Partners. So Mike Scott tells a great story. He, of course, is one of the co-founders of Cannapreneur Partners. Anyway, it was a perfect time to play that story because we're talking about self-medication. We're talking about a family. Someone in your family needs help, and you're at wit's end. You don't know what to do. Traditional medicine is not working. So that's when a lot of people turn to cannabis to give it a shot for either the first time or first time since college back in the day. And a great example of that, right, Dan? And here he is now jumping in, and I really like the fact that Cannapreneur Partners is doing right by doing good. They really want to impact. I call it socially responsible capitalism.
Profits with purpose is how we phrase it. Profits with purpose. Look, I mean, everybody can win in this industry. That's one of the best parts about. That's one of the really exciting parts, personally, about being in cannabis. This is something that really can change lives. All of the stuff aside about the whatever the promises of business acumen or medical breakthroughs and everything else, looking at it at the broadest painted strokes, right? I was listening to a fantastic podcast about a week or two ago.
In the Weeds with Jimmy Young?
That was one of them.
Okay,
sure. And then around that one was another one. I forget the guy's name. Anyway, I thought it was Mike Miller. I think it was Mike Miller.
Mike Miller. Okay.
Anyway, it was talking about how cannabis is a plant as an economic engine, as a medicine, as a way for kicks, as a way for enhancing one's life versus alcohol and most drugs, which are escape. Right? Cannabis really is enhancement. It's the repositioning of former issues that, whether they are psychological, whether they're physical, there is a large spectrum of applications for this product. But on top of that, this is something that can be grown around the world. Think about it in terms of like how a lot of the global struggles in a geopolitical sense are being formed. It's really because people are without basic creature comforts, sometimes without even human comforts, living on the verge of the Stone Age, in wartime places, in the middle of the desert, in all places of the world. Cannabis can be grown all over the world. And you know what? If actual grows can be set up on the Gaza Strip, which they are, and you can have Israelis and Palestinians working in cultivation centers together. Like, look, at the end of the day, if you have a roof over your head, and I'm paraphrasing from a podcast I heard, if you have a roof over your head, if you're providing for your family, if you're doing it in such a way, doing something you like, and something that is actually creating a mass benefit, both economically and medicinally, and in every other way that cannabis can benefit the world, really, then you're probably less likely to hate your neighbor. You're probably less likely to want to cause violence to somebody else, to have, some kind of systemic violence take root in your head and, prey on fears and insecurities and everything else that, leads to a lot of bad shifts in the culture. That's a very rosy, colored look at it all, but that's a reality. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with the fact that this is something that is turning other people's lives around. Sometimes it's in a medicinal sense. A lot of times, and that's where where Cannapreneur Partners comes in, where a lot of the interest in the business of cannabis is coming in, is that there are people now that are either going to be trying to pull themselves out of the black market, unless they want to stay in the black market because of regulatory delays, or look at what's happening in California right now. I mean, their black market's more robust than ever, because they've had a lot of different wonky issues in the mid-ground since legalization. But you know what? California is still a state in the Republic that has a greater GDP than, I think, the country of France or something. You know what I mean? And they have the biggest legal market. These are the growing pains. These are the tectonic shifts that are happening while the entire industry settles underneath it.
Yeah, one of the things I want to make sure, and I want to get this out here too, we all recognize that this plant has enhancements, has benefits, medicinal qualities, the whole 9 yards. But it can't cure everything. And I think that's one of the things that I'm already hearing from the anti-community saying, it's not a cure-all for everything, but it can change people's lives even in a small way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, look, as much as, and I do subscribe to that. I mean, like, I think there is a lot of overstatement of of what could be the case.
Yep.
That's really what we're dealing with, right? And sort of this like bizarro, through the looking glass, Ludwig Wittgenstein, like the world is all that is the case, like kind of thing. People are making macro statements about, look at what's just happening with the FDA, like cracking down on CBD companies. Just like, all right, stop. You can't say using this will make you ride a unicorn into like
It happened.
a land of cheeseburgers. Like,
It happened to Curaleaf, located
Of course,
here in
yep,
Wakefield,
yep.
Massachusetts.
Right.
They paid a $250,000 fine, and they got stuff.
That wasn't
it.
for
I know that
claims.
wasn't
Yeah,
it. It was a
that-
tough week, though. I mean, the
Yeah,
FDA took their stuff off because they were making medical claims.
Right.
So we get that.
But here's the deal. I mean, in that's really born from it. You know, this is something that isn't new. Like, that's one of the things that a lot of the public commentary really brought up. That was some of the things that the community really brought up in the early days as we move towards trying to pass Question 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that, you know, for every prohibitionist commentary or platform or political stance that would either cite some regurgitated bad junk science or outdated stigmata or some other gibberish that says if you even touch the plant, then your head's going to cave in and your feet's going to fall off and it's going to weaken the resolve of our allies around the world and all this nonsense. Like, at the end of the day, we are at a place where there's enough critical mass coming where people are actually at a point of making too many good claims on it. Like, this is the reverse of cannabis in popular American culture for the last 65 years, right? And moreover, that to me is indicative of the fact that there are enough people being wowed by this. There are people that are legitimately having their lives change in very small ways, but are in the ways that are the most meaningful. Whether it's somebody with anxiety that tried full spectrum, plant-based, really well-made CBD oil for the first time, or the arthritic person that put the cream on, or whatever else, or the first time somebody tried CBD in conjunction with a little bit of THC for that entourage effect. The first time somebody tried a CBD cocktail that is non-alcoholic, terpene-rich with organic pressed terpenes, and now there's an entire other field of study going on with the entourage effect that has nothing to do with THC and CBD. It's how the actual terpenes, those essential oils that make not only cannabis but any plants, have their essence. Pinene is pine trees. If somebody, you tell somebody you can't breathe, what's the old wives' tale or the old adage? Go take a hike in woods. Why? Because conifer-rich forests are active in pinene. Pinene is an anti-inflammatory for your lungs. You walk around in a forest for an hour, you come out, you're breathing in all these oils. You go up to a lavender plant. Look at a lavender plant in your kitchen. You go up and you smell it. There is no smell whatsoever. You clap one of the leaves and it's lavender in your face. That's limonol or something.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, so now people are really trying to look at what the actual entourage effect with these naturally occurring essential oils that are independent of cannabis. They just happen to also be woven in there.
It's chemistry 101, and I'm sure Dr. Curt Dalton can, reflect on that.
Dr. Dan takes
That's
over.
Right. No, but go ahead.
But generally, he's right on, with the FDA. We do a lot of medical articles at Cannabis.net, and the general rule is you can't say cure.
Right.
That's too universal.
Impact.
If you say it helps, you better be citing a few things because the FDA can say, well, what are the studies that say it helps?
Right.
And that's really where you're at, is the waterfall effect. We call it with our writers. Like, we don't say it's not going to be a cure. Plenty of people with cancer, unfortunately, who have tried cannabis, pass away. But we can say it helps with this, and if you say it helps, you better be citing something in your article.
Yeah, and again, there's a ton of anecdotal evidence, and yet this plant has been studied more than any other plant that I know of, like 30,000 by the substance abuse community. They were looking for years for a reason why this plant isn't good. What are the negative effects of this plant? They looked. They had over 30,000 studies done on cannabis, and less than 4% came up with anything negative. Now, I'm not saying that you cannot abuse this. You can abuse anything. You can abuse water. You can abuse fruits, sugar. I love my sugar.
I abuse coffee every day.
Right.
Every day I take a substance that is controlled by the federal government because of its potential impact on health if you overuse or abuse it. And every day I crush coffee to the point the world is shaking around me. That's just my routine. Right. But I mean, that is technically taking too much of a controlled substance.
Right. Exactly right. Mike, we have a video that's called Abacus R Us. right? I'd like to roll that, and then we get to talk a little bit more about this specific product and also our friends at CBD Medic. Go ahead.
You like to stay active, but when pain gets in the way, reach for CBD Medic. All natural, topical pain relief with the benefits of THC-free hemp oil. Just apply at the source for fast relief of pain. CBD Medic, available at CVS.
All of our products are registered with the FDA, and that is an anomaly today.
Yes, it is.
Okay? We go back, actually, our science, our technology goes back 15 years as a pharmaceutical company. And we already knew how to file products, topical products, OTCs, over-the-counter products with the FDA, and to be able to, to make medical claims with those products. That is really important because in the industry today, you have a lot of products out there that will say, well, you can use this for relaxation, you can use this for that, this, and they're not making medical claims, or if they are, they're illegally making the claims. But we want to be able to be above board, do it the right way, based on real science, and that's what we do.
That is Perry Antleman, the CEO of CBD Medic and Abacus. And like Perry, he's a nice Jewish boy from Newton, as am I.
Oh, boy.
All right, and cited a lot of the research that comes out of Israel on this specific plant. And, it always amazes me at how a small nation can make such an impact on the world.
And that was something I wanted to ask you. I mean, there's so much data and so much research that's come out of the Middle East and Israel, and specifically, not only because, I mean, for a long time, their moves have been gigantic, right? They were the ones that, they have technology for precise dose cartridge, whole plant-based cannabis vaporization technology that got a $12 million boost from Philip Morris 5 or 6 years ago, right? They're really constantly at the cutting edge. Besides what's lacking in federal research and data, I mean, you just must have access to so much, double placebo, peer-reviewed, anecdote, must have so much things that would just go right under the place that would constitute somebody going, oh, is that federal data? That's the one I trust. You just must have a mountain just underneath there.
Yeah, most of our writers, and we do have some in Israel, will always have to cite those medical journals.
Yeah.
And Israel, for the listeners and the viewers that don't know, they are 25 years ahead in research than even the U.S. West Coast. They are doing, as Dan mentioned, there's an inhaler for very much looks just like an asthma. I think it's up to at least $20 million in funding. Exact dosage, stuff that we're
right?
Yes,
yeah,
that's
I
right.
read about that. Yeah.
We cover those kind of things in our startup spotlights. But just to see the science, I hope there is some agreement at some point between the U.S. and Israel on the sharing of information and this coming together on this particular subject of. They're 25 years ahead of us in their studies. We could learn so much. We're just starting at years 4. They're at 30. What are we about to find out? And why? Let's not waste time and money.
Yeah, and then remembering that that's 25 actual years, and any 1 year in cannabis is 7 dog years, right?
Yeah.
So they're actually a generation ahead of us, basically, because they have such on research, specifically research. Yep.
Absolutely. One of the big subjects that we really haven't touched on is the challenges that law enforcement are having recognizing operators driving vehicles under the influence of cannabis. And the problem is there's a ton of people out there that are not impaired when they drive under the influence of cannabis, and they actually can be more focused on the road. Now, I'm not saying go out and do 20 bong hits and then get behind the wheel of a car. Do not do that. That's stupid. Act like an adult.
Stop at 10.
Right. Stop at 10. Stop at 1 because you only need one bong hit these days, right? I mean, the stuff is so powerful.
Speak for yourself, Jimmy. Come on.
Anyway, my point is I want to get your guys' feelings about what law enforcement's trying to do and how in the world are they ever going to figure out a way to test those that are behind the wheel of a car that are under the influence, by the way, not just of cannabis, but how are you going to test it if they're under the influence of Percocet or Adderall or any number of drugs that are already available over the counter and also by prescription? How are they ever going to do this, guys?
Well, I know we've covered, I think, 3 of the startups that are trying to develop the standard that everyone accepts. And you're right, everyone's endocannabinoid system is different. It's not like alcohol where it's 2 beers for this one, 4 for this one. The problem they're having, law enforcement, is that no matter what system they pick, when the person challenges it in front of a judge, it falls apart.
Right.
Because it's just not the data. They said this isn't the same. And the judge goes, by law, boom, dismissed. So, and it's funny, we talked about standardization in the lab testing, the Leafly article this week about lab shopping, how people are taking their flower and basically shopping it. You can take it to a cannabis lab that test it, and you would get 3 different results at 3 different labs. So especially on the West Coast, there's lab shopping. So I want the lab, much like the U.S., how we rate bonds in the United States, is whatever lab gives me the best THC rating, I'm going to give my next batch to and my next batch. So I said when the federal law changes, certainly the FDA will have a standard protocol for testing that you have to go by, whatever it's going to be, through light spectrometry or solutions. And I think the same thing will happen on the breathalyzer side. There will be, was it 0.2 or 0.6 or whatever it is for alcohol? It's going to be a cannabis number. And regardless of if you're 300 pounds or 100 pounds, we got to, it's going to be a number at some point. And the judges have to go by that because they have no guidance right now, the judges, when it's challenged.
Right. And how are they going to tell? They're going to do a pinprick of your finger to get a blood test out of you? Are they going to make it pee in the cup on the side of the road? I mean, this is not an easy thing. This is not an easy thing to come up with.
I mean, I wouldn't even begin to speculate right now, right? Because there's a few different angles to look at it by. Eventually fast forward on a long enough timeline, and it's eventually something's going to be set up. We have no idea what that looks like yet. We might not even speak the language that it's going to need to be spoken in right now.
Cars might be driving themselves by that time.
Yeah, by that time,
you can do 20 bog hits. That's good. They're good.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to need that just to get into the car. Right. If Boston traffic continues on the way it is.
That's right. That's another story.
But yeah, look, a lot of the pre-legalization arguments from a lot of cannabis foes were, these wild stories like there's going to be somebody hitting a joint and then just mowing over kids.
Zombie apocalypse on the roads.
Oh God! I mean, forget it. Let alone the fact that there was a large prohibitionist movement. Safe and Safe and Healthy Mass or no?
Yep.
Sam that did that. The famous Kevin video before the election. Like the moms driving by down whatever it was Route 1, and it was
we may have done a parody on that. I will stay low over there.
Yeah. Kevin. Meanwhile, making it look like there was weed brownies in the window it's at a bakery. It was just ridiculous.
Well, the best part of that too is Kevin comes out with a grocery bag,
a sack,
he's coming to Stop and Shop with about $4,000 worth of cannabis. He goes, Mom, and he's got this huge bag, it's trick or treat. I'm like, wow, that kid did well. That's a lot of weed, kid.
That's a lot of
he's
weed.
8 coming out of that.
He clearly was not paying the full tax on that because his mowing route wasn't going to do that. So in terms of law enforcement, eventually a standard's going to get hit. But look, we are so in the early days right now. There's no way to look at that because, like you said, it constantly falls apart in front of a judge. On top of that, there is no agreed upon science or technology that can actually adequately demonstrate levels of impairment based on agreed upon standards or rates, right? On top of that, cannabis fundamentally functions within the body differently than alcohol. You want proof of that? Challenge anybody who's a drinker to go shot for joint. I guarantee you the person that has 10 joints is still functional. They're just going to be super baked, but they're going to be functional. And the person that had 10 shots is going to be a disaster.
Right.
So it functions within the body differently. Then you get into all the other the little bits of details about body type, about tolerance. I mean, what I consume in an average day, to somebody that does not consume at all, that would be putting them in front of a charging African rhino, and they'll get mowed over, and that's just probably not the person to get behind a wheel. Having said that, cannabis on the roads isn't new. It's been around for years. People have been driving stoned on the roads for 30 years. And I'll tell you what, the people that I know that are stoned on the road, I'm not talking about a first-time user that rips a joint or hits a vape and suddenly gets behind the wheel of, their auntie's Tesla and goes careening off a bridge or whatever. I'm talking about somebody that's a daily user. They're using this as medicine as like anything else, or as a self-medication. I'll tell you what, I used to have terrible road rage. Now, I'm not going to admit on the air what I do or do not do before I get behind the wheel of the car, but I'll tell you what, I'm a pretty chill driver these days.
Now you're good.
I am safe as hell. I mean, I get that nice sweet spot of like 8 to 12 miles over the speed limit, get the cruise control on, throw an album on. I don't have to worry about anything, that kind of stuff. But the reality is this. Cannabis has been on the roadways for a long time. Now, look back at the data, whatever data is available. You will not find somebody that conclusively, like if some kind of horrific, fatal accident happened or something, or some other infraction of the law, when it involves driving on the road, they're really, the data is very low, if anything. But if there's cannabis in their system, it's typically in conjunction with other things. Yeah, right. Now, I have personally been on the road driving on 93, stuck by exit 18 outside of the tunnel like everybody else, going south, and just been in bumper-to-bumper traffic. And I've just seen people openly crack open a medicine bottle, must be Prozac, Lexapro, who knows what it is, take a little fistful of Skittles, knock them back, and just get ready for their trip down a Fall River. I've watched that. Now, if you can tell me that somebody would watch that and be like, that person's abusing drugs in the car, chances are it looks like a prescription bottle. Somebody might look like, I don't know, they're just taking their medicine. Right. It leaks into that. This all comes back to the stigma, right? When is mommy needs a glass of wine going to be just as acceptable as mommy needs a joint in the cultural parlance? That's acceptable. Woo, mommy's had a bad day, I need a glass of wine. You say that around somebody, be like, mommy needs a joint, it's been a long day. Somebody be like, what did you just say?
Right.
That's
going to change.
That's that double standard,
right.
And that's how that wraps up into the larger argument of everything from law enforcement and standards.
So I got a question for you guys about punishment. If punishment is going to be set up to fit the crime, and if we both all recognize that we are certainly not going to sit here and say, have 10 bong rips and get behind the wheel of a car. We don't want you to do that. If you do something like that, you're putting yourself in danger and those around you. So we are not saying, get high and get behind the wheel of a car.
Of course.
Okay? I want to make sure I keep coming back to that. Mm-hmm. But maybe instead of an arrest for operating under the influence, there's a hefty fine. Or something that they can, and again, you're going to go through before the judge, and the judge is going to say, you know what, you can't prove it. How do you prove he's impaired, even though we have this in the system? There's got to be a way to create something where the punishment will fit not necessarily the crime, but definitely the mistake in judgment of doing that. And I don't know what that would be.
I don't know either, and that I'd love your perspective. I mean, what do you think about the DREs? These supposed experts that, if you got pulled over, they'd just be this extra person in law enforcement that would come out and assess and be like, "Yep, on drugs." I still don't fully understand how they anticipated to make that work, and that's a part of why those things would fall apart in front of a judge. But it's because there is no agreed upon standard. So it's almost like having a life coach come in and enforce the law next to you. You're like, what are you saying to me?
Yeah. So the listeners and viewers don't know. There's a movement. I think I know it's in Mass, but to have a trained professional, I don't know if it's a state police.
Right. There's a course that they take.
Yeah,
there's a course that they take.
So,
drug education course or something.
Yeah. Sure. I'm pretty sure that person gets up on the stand with your honor. I don't think he's going to hold up too well either. It's one of those. They get trained in alcohol training too. I had a buddy from high school that, believe it or not, he got picked to go to the state police. You start drinking as fast as you can at 8 a.m. They get you hammered by 10. And then for all the rookie police, they put you out on a course. And they literally go through that, and you have to do it 2 days in a row. Yeah. So let's do that with the marijuana testing at the state barracks.
Well, I'd actually like to see a defensive driving test for all drivers, because the biggest distraction on the road is the phone.
Texting, yeah.
Okay? It's the phone.
Way more deadly.
Way more deadly. And I can attest that I was hit at a red light by someone who was on the phone. Let's just leave it at that, because there is some litigation. I don't want to get into more about that. Is that okay? I know Curt wanted to.
Way to bury that.
I can't do it. That's enough. And besides, I'm taking back control because I'm going to wrap up this whole program. And I want to thank everybody who participated and contributed to this program. It started with Steve D'Angelo. My God, what fun to talk with a legend from California. Seth Ginsburg from Creaky Joints. David Rabinovich was in studio. Dan McCarthy. You and I just keep showing up in the same studio. It's kind of scary.
What's the name of his group?
Kismet, man.
It's Cannapreneur Partners.
Oh, man. It's like
partners.
I need a shower.
It's like late night, like love radio.
All right. I gotta thank Dan French. He produced today. Jason Wolf, who's out there helping us out. The whole Pro Cannabis Media team now, Byron Rest, Todd Ames, Joyce Gerber. Thank you all. I also want to put a shout out to Steve Helmuth, who is our technical director, and he's so good. He's at Fox 25. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that. He got all upset at me when I said that. I'm like, I don't care. You think I care? You think I care, Steve? You're going to get a full-time job. Relax, all right?
Jimmy's a renegade. You can't keep this guy down.
And lastly, the guy who put us on live streaming, kept us going, put up the right videos. Everything came in place. Mike Zotos from Performer TV, and I thank our friend Nicole for introducing us. So for everybody here that has put together this We Talk Live program, I thank you all. I'm the host right now, Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. We're going to leave you with a little, it's not an outtake, but it's me and Perry hanging out, and I tried some of his product, and I got to tell you, it works.
Is this the dab?
No, this is not the dab.
It definitely should be
I'll
the
show
dab.
it to you later.
It's not the dab, but it should be the dab.
Oh, my God. It's just stuff on my hands. It worked, okay? We'll see you next time.
See the hands.
Thank
See you later.
So anybody who's watched the In the Weeds with Jimmy Young podcast at some point knows sometimes I show my gross fingers that are riddled with osteoarthritis, and I've tried every topical in creation to try and get rid of the inflammation, try to get rid of the aching that I have on a regular basis. And by the way, this is the only one of many body parts that's wreaked with osteoarthritis. And Perry, you're going to allow me to try your product. And tell me why this is going to work, because I'm supposed to.
Sure. So CBD Medic, first of all, is based on 15 years of research and development. It is all about understanding how CBD works with the body, with the endocannabinoid system. What you're putting on right now is a special formulation that absorbs quickly into the top 4 layers of the skin. It is also infused with leading analgesics like camphor and menthol. And on top, sorry about the phone.
That's all right.
Yeah, with camphor and menthol. Yeah. And on top of that, additional terpenes and CBD. So you have like a 1, 2, 3, 4 punch right now.
Okay.
And this is going to absorb quickly into your skin.
Yeah.
Okay. First, you're going to feel the cooling effect of the camphor and the menthol.
I already
starting to feel it now.
Woo! Yeah.
And it's going to even get more intense over the next 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. But after that, the pain relief is going to start coming in as the CBD connects with primary receptors in your skin. Yep. And you will have not 20 to 40 minutes of topical pain relief like you have in the other products, but you will experience anywhere from 2 to 6 hours. Because once we connect to the receptors within your top layers of the skin, you're going to have fantastic pain relief.
And I guarantee you, if this works, folks, I'm going to be their company spokesperson. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, I have you on record now.
Yes, you do.